Most tax pros leave a message.
It's Jane. I'm moving on to a TurboTax expert who beat your price. Adam Devine, tell him how I feel.
Hey, tax pro, she's been thinking twice. Best believe TurboTax will beat your price. This is a tax break.
Switch to a TurboTax Live expert and we'll beat what you paid your pro last tax season. Make the switch at turbotax.com/beatyourprice. TurboTax full service only. Sign up by 12/20/2024 and file by 4/1/2025. Full details at turbotax.com/beatyourprice.
Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances, the podcast where we take you down the rabbit hole into the fantastic world of the strange, the paranormal, and the unknown. I'm Morgan Knudsen.
And I'm Mike Browne. It's time to dim the lights and settle in. Come along with us in this week's adventure. And boy, this one's been an adventure so far.
Oh my gosh.
Holy smokes. What is going on? It seems like everything that could go wrong technologically has gone wrong with this particular episode.
It's wild. And, every once in a while we get that with an interview, something doesn't work out, and you have to troubleshoot or whichever. But
sure.
This has been crazy. And even here as we sit trying to record this introduction, we're still having problems. What the heck is happening?
My computer just decided to turn off. It's like, nope, you're not going to record this. We're going to turn this off for you. What is going on?
I don't know, but man, it mirrors the case that we're about to talk about.
That's right. We're here to talk about Darcie McGrath's interesting book, The Browne House. And it's a novel that follows Catherine Gray, a clinical therapist and natural medium. Her abilities often lead to a solitary life as she navigates a world that struggles to understand her gifts. The story delves into themes of isolation and acceptance, exploring Catherine's journey as she confronts the mysteries and special phenomena of Browne House. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and here Browne House was actually based on the Mason House Inn, which is the story, the true story that we're going to be talking about as well. And Darcie's amazing because she is a aerospace engineer, which is pretty incredible.
She's no slouch. So she's a rocket scientist, essentially.
She's a rocket scientist, and she's very, very well versed in parapsychology, and she's just one of these, again, brilliant people that we get to talk to.
How does this keep happening? We just keep getting these cool folks. Anyway, I'm good with it. I'm not complaining.
Oh, me neither. It's so interesting, and I can't wait to talk about the Mason House Inn because this is a bed and breakfast in Iowa, of all places, that has some absolutely strange and bizarre phenomenon that goes on. So let's talk to Darcie.
Yeah, let's do that. Before we get into things, let's introduce Darcie, and then we'll talk about what just happened to us here.
Absolutely. So, Darcie, thank you so much for coming today. Again, this has absolutely been a really interesting beginning to our interview. Mike, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what's just happened here.
Yeah, so what essentially happened was we logged in to our software that we typically use to record our interviews, because we have software that allows guests to come in and we can record them on different tracks. It's very nice. However, when Darcie showed up, there was a loud sound and we had to have her reconfigure some things. But then when she came back, we weren't able to get any recording from her. It kept stopping. Her recording kept stopping. So we had to choose a different form of recording. So now we're using Zoom. But, it's kind of interesting that we're going to be talking about weird and paranormal things, especially this ghost story that Darcie has to tell us. And these things are happening right out of the gate.
Yeah, and right in the stories, the encounters that she's about to talk to us about. So that's really fun. I love it when stuff like this goes on, like you were saying. And today we've got Darcie McGrath here talking about her book Browne House, but also the case behind it, which was a true story. And this is a place that people out there, if you're looking for an October thing to do, you can go, which makes this extra special. These small towns that have these really interesting, unique, haunted places that are really just paramount to so much of both Canadian and American history, which is super cool. So yeah, let's get going. Darcie, what inspired you to write this? Because this is an interesting case with a lot of sort of hometown, homegrown context to it.
Oh, there's a lot here. It's one of those towns of 80 people. You blink, you miss it. It is definitely a destination location. And when I was running my own paranormal team years ago, one of our sister teams actually suggested going to this house because it was claiming to be the most haunted place west of the Mississippi. Well, I've been all over. I spent a lot of time in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and I'm like, okay, we'll see about that. But that one trip left an impression, but not an overwhelming impression at the time. But a couple years later, I ended up teaching parapsychology at a local community college. And one of my students actually brought the house up to me again. I'm like, oh yeah, haven't been there in a while. I'll have to go back for a visit. And I remember going back there and spending the night in one of the rooms upstairs. Met the family, a very lovely family that owned the house. They had a special needs daughter named Ginny, and very sweet gal. And she had the upstairs apartment over where I was sleeping. And I remember going to bed that night, and I was like, gosh, she's awfully noisy up there. When does she go to bed? So I was getting a little frustrated with a little bit of the noise, and I didn't want to be rude about it. But when I went out down for breakfast in the morning, because it is a bed and a breakfast, and mentioned to her mom, I says, just out of curiosity, what time does Ginny go to bed? Because it was kind of loud up there last night. And she looked at her husband, and her husband looked at her and said, "You were in which room?" And I told them, and they said, "That's the attic above you. There's nobody up there."
Oh.
And I said, it sounded like somebody was taking heavy boxes and dragging them across the floor. And they just kind of laughed and said, well, some of our moving boxes are still up there. Maybe they're going through them trying to figure out what's in there. And she said, welcome to Mason House, which is the name of the actual house. I can say that now. So that intrigued me. So I'm like, okay, fine. We'll have to come back again. And as I got to teaching the classes, I figured, well, I'm going to offer this as a field trip extension if the class wants to go. And so I ended up doing that. It was all on me. I had to organize it. It was outside of the school. And the owners were very, very cooperative about the whole thing. And a lot of the students did sign up to go. So a lot of our teachings in the class kind of led up to going to this place and being respectful and learning how to interview spirits and entities in a respectful manner, because we didn't want to upset the activity there, because the owners did live there. It was one of the rare places I've actually been to where the owners still lived in the house. They had an apartment in the back. So we wanted to make sure not to upset anything. And the whole thing just kind of took off from there. I kind of expected to, collect some electronic voice phenomenon bits with recorders and maybe some pictures with a camera. And worst case scenario, if they didn't have any experiences, they had a bed and breakfast in the morning.
Sure.
Yeah. 5 years later, I left. Yeah. So I ended up coming down there quite regularly just to make sure that the activity was okay and nothing was going wrong there. It's very difficult to find a location where you don't have to worry about the activity shifting and changing and possibly being a nuisance to the students. So, but this place was so benign. But it was very, very curious about us as much as we were about them. And so it got to a point that we started having conversations on the recorder back and forth. And some of the people that were in my class were engineers, because I live in engineering central here. I'm in aerospace engineering as my day job. And so some of the engineers heard about the classes I was teaching, and they started taking them. Well, they wanted to bring down equipment of their own and start doing experiments down here. And they were having interesting experiences as well. So it just turned into a very fascinating place that was very communicative, very responsive. And then I started having things happening at home. It's like me being down there once a month wasn't enough for that. It started following me around.
So what was happening?
Well, I ended up having visitations at night, the feeling that somebody was in the room. I would hear doors closing and footsteps. And it got to the point that I started putting the recorder out and trying to find out who was there. And it turned out it was Harold. Now, Harold, I get into this character in quite a bit of depth in the book. In the book, he's called Charlie. But he was purported to be a Union Civil War officer that was an artillery officer from Peoria, Illinois, who was involved in the American Civil War. And he was doing border patrol duty between Missouri and Iowa, which is in between, right down there next to where the house was. And he had become wounded, and they tried to stabilize him there at the house before putting him on the rail car to the field hospital, and he didn't survive to get to the train. So he passed away there, but he'd been there for a long time. The owners were very familiar with him. He tends to be a fan favorite in that house because he's very, very advanced in what he can do. He's dug into the bottom of purses and gotten phones to talk without ringing. He would play with a guitar tuner that I kept in my purse and kept setting it off to the point I had to pop the battery out, and it still kept going off.
Oh, geez. Wow.
But, and then one of the things that I was discussing shortly before he came online here, I know you had that interview with Cal Cooper, and they had updated the telephone to the dead book of Scott Rogo's. And I can see why they had to update the book, because the technology has changed, because he was playing with that as well. I would get a phone call, and I'd look at the caller ID, and his name would be on it.
Really?
It would say Harold. And I'm like, I don't have anybody in my contacts named that. And then I'd pick up the phone and talk, and it's somebody else I know.
No.
And I'm like,
that's wild.
Yeah. So I would ask, okay, now are you using somebody? I would go through the Rolodex of possible troubleshooting. I mean, are you using somebody else's phone? Does this name mean anything to you? No. And I'm like, okay, well, that's just really bizarre. So I go and program the person's information into my contacts, and then it went away. I'm like, oh, shoot. I shouldn't have done that. I should have screen captured it and saved it. That'll never happen again. Next morning, it happened again.
Oh, my gosh.
So he definitely learned how to manipulate technology in a way that I'd never seen before. And there was another circumstance. We had somebody coming to the house on a regular basis that was a celeb type, I guess you can say. He played a lot with the Frank Sumption box, the old version of the SB7 Spirit box.
Maybe explain to the audience a little bit about what that is, because I'm sure some people won't be familiar.
Sure. The Spirit boxes are I call it a broken radio, because basically that's what it is. Investigators use it out in the field where they will basically take the tuner lock out of the radio, and they will allow the band to sweep up and down the band on the radio. And if you speak questions, the radio may answer you. And so there was a very early version of this by a gentleman by the name of Frank Sumption. He had developed it after reading a Popular Mechanics magazine. And he was an amateur radio operator, so he was familiar with communications. And so he developed a fairly good-sized box. I would say it's probably about the size of a small laptop. And he was trying to get somebody to take him seriously and take it forward and research it. And it ended up in the hands of a few ghost hunter celebrity types that really didn't do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, one of those ended up at the house. And so this guy would come on a regular basis, and he would start talking to the entities there. And what was really ironic is that some of the conversation coming through the box did actually mirror some of the conversations we were having with electronic voice phenomena. So to weed some stuff out, I started tapping some of my good friends that I'd worked with in the field that were professional mediums. And I wanted to get more feedback from them. They did not know where I was going. I did not share any information with them. So they would come down to the house and give me an objective a feel of what they were getting from the house. But a lot of the things that they were getting down at the house tended to align not only with the stuff we were getting on the electronic voice phenomenon, but the stuff coming from the box. Now, I have to be upfront with you. I am not a fan of that box. I don't like it.
You and me both.
Matter of fact, I talked to mediums about it, and they don't like it either. Simply because there is no discernment element that they learned to kind of develop over the years of working in mediumship. The box doesn't have that. It kind of cuts that out. And so a lot of times investigators are using those boxes. They don't know exactly what it's saying or who's saying it or in what context. But a medium can do that if they are of a practiced modality. So, but I've also had mediums tell me that after those boxes have been to certain locations, the activity has actually gotten worse.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. Like, I know, for me, the issues that I always have with these anything to do with radio or anything like that is like the power of suggestion,
Yes.
right. And our own psychokinetic ability to influence what the radio is doing. Like, that's always been my hesitancy with boxes like that. But like, what I find really interesting is the fact that you guys were experiencing the technology being manipulated, like things like the phone. And it seemed like it was through more than one medium. It wasn't just like, okay, this one thing over here was acting up. You guys had so many things going on. And what was really impactful to me was when you said that when you pulled the battery out of the tuner, the thing was still going off.
Yeah. So, yeah. And this particular entity in general seemed to have that effect on technology. But what was really fascinating is I didn't get a good feel from the box or the operator that was using it. Mm-hmm. So I would my own backup to listen to what was being picked up. And I started listening to the electronic voice phenomenon that was actually developing around the box. Mm-hmm. And that's usually the stuff that people skip over.
Sure.
When they listen to the box, they're listening to the surface noise from the box. They're not listening to anything going on around it. And I was hearing some not so positive things going on around that box. They were not happy with it. They didn't like it. There were things that were trying to communicate through the box with them. They did not want those in their house. And it became almost like a contentious little battle of these things that were somehow almost using the box like a GPS coordinate. It was very, very strange.
Yeah, that's super spooky.
Yeah. And so, but I got to listening to the electronic voice phenomena, and the things were starting to come into the house and they could not make it stop. And I heard them mention something about, hey, we need to get out of here. Who has the key? I'm like, key? What are they talking about? Key? And that's when I heard the voice that we knew as Harold saying, I have the key. Well, get us out of here. Okay, let's get out of here. I'm like, key.
Interesting. Well, it's interesting too with the idea of the of a key. Do you think you guys could have been picking it up on place memory? Like, it almost sounds to me like, especially through electronic voice phenomenon, like that would be a combination that or a conversation that living people would have about leaving a house, especially the house that has a background in Civil War.
Well, I thought it's interesting that you say that, because when I heard this conversation going on, I thought about the same thing. I'm like, what key are they talking about? What version of the key are they? I'll never hear this again. This is very odd. It's just a one-off. I'm just writing it off. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward 6 months later, I end up in Kentucky at another case. And I was working with a medium that wasn't my first choice. It was somebody else's choice that brought the medium along. They were not very practiced or good. And they were. I was afraid that they were creating a combative atmosphere with what might be there and the way that they were behaving. And so I decided when we switched locations, we were switching out on a floor basis. I was doing the upstairs for a while, and then they were doing downstairs. When I heard the conversations she was having down in the basement, I was concerned that the owner might have some trouble after we left. You understand what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I went down to the basement with the recorder to do a sweep to see if there was any problems with anything that might still be there. And I got an electronic voice phenomenon voice that said, well, her rumph will leave. Where's... I said, wait a minute. I played that back and says, yeah. It asked, where's the key? I have the key. Okay, where does the key go? It goes across the river. Oh, okay, let's go.
Huh.
I'm like, am I stumbling across here? What is this key?
Right.
And so I got to talking with another medium that was not involved in the case. And we started talking about, I played the recordings for her. And she goes, yeah, I'm hearing it too. And I said, so what are they meaning by key? Is it like a physical key, like a brass key? What are we talking about? And she just laughed. And I said, what? And she says, they're talking to me now and they're saying, you have so much to learn, grasshopper. And I'm like, uh-oh. But the house just had so many secrets that would just open up like that over and over and over. And yeah, so just about everything that's in the book either happened to me directly or happened to other mediums that were there. And from what I understand, some of the activity is still going on today. They're still having some difficulty with the outside of the house. Apparently, somehow the activity in the house was shielding it from the outside effect.
Oh.
So the activity in the house was benign, but the activity outside the house was not. And so because of the, I don't know how to explain it, the elevated nature of these beings, they were able to keep the bad stuff outside as long as they were there. But we've had mediums that have come that didn't know each other, that were experiencing things peering in the windows at them that were just absolutely terrifying.
Okay, that's creepy as hell.
Yeah.
That's creepy. Were they describing these things? Like, what were people seeing?
It was almost like some sort of wraith type entity with this cloak and this red eyes and this really almost like a decrepit, what do you call it? Almost like a zombie type, flesh coming on. It was really, really terrifying. And I'd never seen, I had worked with this one medium for years and years and years, and she'd done the field trips with me. And I remember the night she came charging in with everybody in tow behind her. And she had radioed me from outside and said, we're coming in right now. And I'm like, I've never heard her like that. I mean, she's pretty solid. Nothing rattles her. She's been doing this for years. Mm-hmm. And she was just almost to the point of tears. She goes, that thing outside, whatever that was, scared the heck out of her. And the things that came out of the water with it. I'm like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah, no, this is a whole nother level of activity going on here.
And it seemed very concentrated around the bridge, which is ironic because there have been stories about the bridge of people that have not been able to cross it. They'll come walk right up on the bridge and then stop. And they said, well, I can't go out there. I'm like, well, but why can't you? I just can't. I can't explain it. I can't go out there. And it seemed to get worse the darker it got outside.
It's interesting. It reminds me, Mike, of a house that we visited a couple of years ago. Well, I was thinking of the house with the acreage with the black thing that we all saw in the trees.
Oh, gosh. Yes.
We had a case a couple of years ago where quite a large group of us had somewhat of a similar experience. Mike, do you want to maybe talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so we were there investigating what we believed, Morgan and some others believed to be dogmen. Now, I don't know what was there personally because I didn't see that.
No, none of us saw him. This was something else.
Right. So what I saw on the edge of the property, and it was late at night. We must have been there around midnight or so. It was very late, and it was really dark, winter, snow on the ground, and on the edge of the property line, just inside the trees, out of the reach of the light just a little bit, I could see this amorphous black shape bouncing around back and forth as though it wanted to come into the property but couldn't find its way in somehow, like something was preventing it from coming in. Now, the property owner told us that she had done some protection work around the property, and perhaps that's what prevented it from coming in. But I thought, are my eyes playing tricks on me? What is going on? But I saw something that was neither animal nor human bouncing around out there along the ground, and it did not look really real to me. I can't explain it in any other way, but it was just this black, shadowy thing.
Yeah, I could not tell what kind of entity this was. If it was like what do you want to call it? An elemental, a nature spirit, or but it extremely grotesque in its appearance. And and a couple of weeks later, we had another field trip that came through, a public event. So these weren't students of mine, but one of my students did come and brought a friend. And she came charging into my room and said, "You got to come in here. You got to come over here. Cheryl's having problems." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." I had no idea. I didn't know who she was. I'd never met her. And so we came into the suite, and every single blind, and you have to understand, this is a pretty good sized suite that overlooks the river. And it's a beautiful suite. Every single blind was pulled closed. And I'm like, what's going on? And something came to her friend at the window.
Whoa.
And glared at her, and just this grotesque grin just staring at her. And she pulled the blind, and it moved to the next window, and then the next one, and then the next one. And so that's why all the shades got pulled, because it was going from window to window, because apparently it knew that it could see her, or she could see it, and was just terrifying her, just scaring her on purpose.
So unnerving. That description reminds me so much of what they call the elemental spirit in Lep Castle in Ireland. And very, very similar description back in the Victorian days. I think it was Mildred Darby, who was in the castle at the time. The Darby family owned it for a while. And her account was, it ended up published in the newspaper. Her account with this thing that seems to exist on the spiral staircase in Lep Castle. And that's exactly what Mildred Darby described as well. This sort of hooded figure that was very short. She said it was about the size of a sheep. And she said the smell was horrendous. She said it smelled like rotting flesh, and it had almost like rotting face, like it just absolutely horrific. And they were terrified of this thing. That and then they would see this thing show up on the balcony in the castle and show up on the stairwell. But that just the description of what you're talking about, and then you brought up the idea of an elemental, just seems like really, really similar.
Yeah, it does. It does. I never made that connection, but yeah, I am familiar with that elemental at Lep. But yeah, it's I thought maybe after a while it had gone away, but then I ran into another team who I was good friends with, and their medium had reported the same thing, that she had been walking around at night outside. And I'm like, well, better you than me. But she looked up at the bridge, and it was perched on the iron girders of the bridge.
Wow.
And she described it, and it was exactly the same thing. And, keep in mind, these mediums don't know each other. This was not published anywhere. This was not put on Facebook or anything. So these people were picking it up independently from one another. So that just lent more credence to me that there was something really going on out there. And then I guess there was another paranormal team that had come to the house with the new set of owners that just took over last year. And they came and they reported the same thing outside the window.
Oh, it's so creepy. I remember when I first heard the story of Lep Castle, that always stuck with me, that description. I never ever forgot it. And I can only imagine what people were seeing, because I mean that's a very specific description to pull out of thin air. It's so creepy. So what were they doing about this? Like, how do you explain to your guests that this is roaming around a property?
I don't know if the new owners were very familiar with it until the new team had come in, and then I was watching the footage from this team because they had posted it on YouTube, and I pointed it out to the new owners. I said, well, you have the book there. And she goes, yeah. She goes, open it to page. And she's like, oh my gosh, it's right there. I said, it's been steamed before.
Oh, wow.
that was really interesting. So I am planning another trip down within 3 weeks with another medium, actually 2. And we're going to see if there's anything we can do down there. So maybe I'll have to follow up with you and let you know.
Well, for sure.
Yeah, now we need to know. There was a lot of history with this place too. Like, this is Iowa. There's a lot of stuff that's gone on there over the years and whatnot. Are there any clues within the land's history, the history of the area, that might indicate what's going on here? Because usually things like an elemental like that seem to crop up when there's been trauma on the property, or like some sort of something bad that's gone on. Like at Lep, there was horrific murders. Of course, there was the oubliette where people were being tortured and killed in the Bloody Chapel and things like that. Is there any sort of history here that lends to something like that on the property? I know we were talking about Civil War. I know this place has Underground Railroad connections. Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, there was a heavy Native American presence along that river there. It's a main hunting route for a lot of the Native Americans. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if there were battles done over that land, because it's very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So, it could be something left over from that period, or maybe some practices that the Native Americans were doing might have done something to the land there. But it's just a very unique location that seems to have some sort of power center that seems to attract and maintain this kind of activity almost all the time. It gets a little less in the wintertime, and a part of that I wonder if it might have to do with the Maxwell effect of running water. I don't mean to get into a science lesson today, but
no, please do talk about the Maxwell effect. Yeah, let's do it.
Running water over rocks tends to manifest electromagnetic fields. So being right there next to the river, with the running water going all the time, that could offer a energy source. All of this is just theoretical. But in the wintertime, of course, the water freezes. So there is no running water anymore. There's also a theory that the act of photosynthesis with the trees in a heavily wooded area could also create the same sort of electromagnetic effect. And of course, in the wintertime, you lose all the leaves on the trees go dormant. So all of these possible energy sources these entities could be drawing from are dormant in the wintertime versus in the spring and summer. So I talked to the owners about that, because when the new owners took over, they were afraid that the entities didn't like them. And I was,
oh no,
I was laughing. Well, they took over in I think February. And so I said, wait till March or April. If you don't hear anything from them by then, let me know. And no, by March and April, things were in swing. So
it's interesting that you bring up seasons, because that's the one thing that I've noticed with my cases as well, is that they actually do, or not all of them. Some of them it just doesn't seem to matter. But there's been a number of cases that I've looked at over the years that do seem to be seasonal, and some of the cases in southern Alberta that I've worked on specifically, I see more activity in certain times of the year, like spring and fall, for instance. And it's very interesting to me. Or sometimes after it rains, I find that there's more activity in certain locations. And I don't know what to make of that at this point. I know we had Mike, you and I, we had Brandon Elvis on recently talking about the Kentucky anomaly and his association with barometric pressure, that there might be something to do with barometric pressure going on, because every time something there happens, the barometric pressure falls through the roof. So it's really interesting, that there seems to be some semblance of seasonal or maybe environmental weather correlations that might be influencing some of this activity. And I think it's something that a lot of people and researchers maybe aren't really looking at. Maybe it's because maybe they know the answer and I don't know the answer, but I haven't heard too much about that, No,
it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the other things that we noticed in this house, we just had the perfect laboratory to test this theory out. So we did. We've heard over the years, and mostly on television, so we can take that for, right?
Yeah, for what it's worth. Yeah.
That thunderstorms and lightning attract activity.
Mm-hmm.
And something about that just didn't sit well with me. Well, I work with a lot of engineers, as I said. And some of them, when they learn about what I do on my off hours, they're either completely repelled by the whole thing or really, really curious. And I got into a conversation with one of the engineers about that. And he's like, well, let's think of it this way. You're an energetic being with a subtle form, and you're going to shove a whole bolt of energy into their environment. What's going to happen to that? It's this coalescence. It's going to lose its control over the environment. They're not going to like that. So if they're outside and they have the safety of this building inside, where do you think they're going to go?
That's interesting.
I'm like, yeah, that does make sense to me. They would want to go somewhere where they could shelter from the storm. And so I had a medium actually sitting in the house, and we had a storm coming in, and I had her sitting with me in the room. And she happened to notice, she goes, oh, there's more entities in here. And there's some more. And there's more. They're coming in from outside, she said. And like, oh, I wonder if we're onto something. We're going to have to start paying attention to that. And when we go to other locations, let's see if we have a similar effect. But I notice during storms, my house gets busier, and my house isn't what I would consider active. I mean, they might be attracted to me. But yeah, I do notice that there's activity in the house, but after the storm passes, it tends to subside and go away. So it's almost like, okay, the storm's over, now we can leave. Is the impression that I feel. But
it's interesting
that as well. And even the innkeeper, who does have sensitivities of her own, has mentioned that when she goes to close the windows, when the storm's coming in, that she oftentimes will sense the entities actually crouch down almost in a fetal position as the storm comes in. And no other time does she witness them doing that. And so
I don't know why, but that just made my stomach flip. I don't know why, but that really disturbed me for some reason.
Well, apparently it sounds like it must disturb them too.
Yeah.
But anyway, talking to different engineers about this kind of stuff, it really does cultivate a lot of interesting theories. Especially when they start applying science to it, or quantum physics, or stuff that I don't know, which is where I learned about the Maxwell effect from one of them. And then, of course, time-space anomalies. And yeah, we get into really deep conversations sometimes.
That's what we're curious about here is, has it been looked at scientifically? Have these stories that we investigate, look into, have people tell us how much actual scientific work has been done in the background to try and rule things out? Because I think that's what's important, is let's rule out things. I think that's what a good parapsychologist does anyway.
Right. Well, that's what really intrigued me when they brought up the idea of like, well, you have that charged environment out there, something that has a tenuous hold on this dimension, or what do you want to say, in this energetic form, may not want to be in that environment. They're going to want to be out of it. And so the whole idea of it is, it's not amping up the activity. It's actually more active in that one point because they're all coming in from outside. So I don't know. It's just an idea that the engineers had come up with that the medium seems to correlate with a bit. But
it's all really interesting. I mean, I think any of the professionals like that, I mean, if they've got a take on something, I want to hear it. Like, I think when we get people of that caliber that are throwing ideas into the pot about what could be going on, I don't think any of that is a bad thing. And because, I mean, at this point, we're all looking for new angles to this and new angles to this phenomenon and what it might be. And that's one thing that I personally don't think that we get enough of in the field, is people like yourself, like, with educational history, like you and the colleagues you work with and things like that, people that have a very different set point and viewpoint on the what the blanket term energy is, because we get that blanket term all the time. It gets thrown around and people are like, well, what do you mean by energy, right? Like energy it's very blanket, and energy is something that is measured and is specific. And I think people like engineers that want to sit down and take a look at this phenomenon, I think it would be really, really welcome to the field. What do you think about that?
Well, I've taken things like, you probably dealt with the Skull Experiment group over in the UK before. They've published their schematics.
Yes.
Their device. And then, of course, Frank Sumption did as well when he first came up with his Frank Sumption Ghost Box. He wanted researchers to look at this. And so I actually took those schematics because the specialty that our group works with here is communications, avionics communications. So I took it to a couple of the systems engineers and I showed these schematics to them, and they just scratched their head and they said, we don't get it. We don't understand. There's no input. There's no microphone input on this thing. There's no, it's just a basic radio. And we see what they do with the tuner lock here, but there's nothing that should be, nothing should be happening to this. So that in itself is curious too. But at the same time, it's like, it just makes you scratch your head as to why everybody jumped on this all of a sudden. Yeah. Why does it have to have one of these boxes? And I've had mediums that have talked to me too, especially one who's a third generation. He calls himself a seer, which is the old term. Europeans use that most of the time for people who have divine insights.
Yes.
But so he's a third generation seer, but he's also a former Benedictine monk.
Oh, wow. That's quite the resume.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's one of the best mediums I've ever worked with. But we've talked about the box, and he doesn't like it either, in the sense that he sees it as nothing more than a Ouija board with batteries. And I'm like, oh, I guess I never really thought about it that way. And I remember reading some of the last blog entries that Frank Sumption had posted before he passed away, is that so many people think they know how this thing works. I don't even know how this thing works, but I will tell you with certainty that it's the user that impacts this device. It is not the device.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
That adds even more credence to the whole Ouija board, phenomenon type idea. And it's amusing that she'll talk to these paranormal teams. It's like, oh, we'll never touch a Ouija board. Bad things happen when that happens. But we'll slap some batteries into one, and then we'll use that and call it time.
I got a Ouija board the other day that's co-branded with The Exorcist just for fun. So
it's so cool. It's so cool. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Ouija boards. Just to I'll just put that out there. Like, I'm a huge fan because I'm like you, Darcie. Like, I am absolutely a firm believer that you the intention and how you go into communication is what sets the tone. And it really is what you attract. It's not about the mechanism or whatever it is you use. It's about the energy that you bring and the emotion and the intention that you bring to the connection and communication with whatever you're reaching out to. And I think that's not just applying to the paranormal. I mean, it applies to people. It's like if you go onto the internet, for example, you've got millions and millions and millions of people out on the internet. You can attract any of them, right? Yeah. And it's like, but when you have that, we know. But it's like, but when when you set that intention and you're sort of sitting and vibrating at a certain frequency, and you're putting certain things out there, you're gonna pull in the right people. And I think this works in a really similar way. So. But this has been absolutely amazing. I want to give you a little bit of time to talk about your book based on the Mason Inn, Browne House, and what it's about and how people can find it, because it's really, really cool.
Right. Well, again, I condensed everything from about 5 years' experiences there into one fiction book. At least at this point, it'll probably end up being 3 by the time I'm done. But it was put in the fiction coding to make it a little bit more entertaining. But yeah, it's called Browne House. It has a lot of parapsychology mixed in there, so you might learn a few things while you're reading it too. I'm always a big fan of books like that. So you can find it on Amazon if you want to get it there, or you can message me, and is there a chance for me to leave contact information with you when we're done here?
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to be putting all of that in the show notes. Right. So people will be able to find you and get the book and talk to you. Yeah, because I can get you a signed copy if you can contact me directly. So Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, I'm sure there's going to be people out there that want to do that. I mean, it's such a cool book, everybody. It's so entertaining. It follows a clinical therapist that is a medium, and she's had inner conflicts about her abilities and her, sort of conflicts with the outside world. And it really delves into a lot of themes, isolation, acceptance, kind of exploring her journey. And it's really, really interesting. And then she ends up at Browne House and has these experiences. It's really a great book, guys. If you want something spooky for Halloween, and you're still going to learn a lot. Darcie McGrath's book is amazing. And the place we're talking about, again, if people are interested, the Mason House Inn. So this has been absolutely awesome. And gosh, I love these conversations. It's Halloween month, guys.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you very much for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Well, there we go. What a great conversation we had with Darcie McGrath. Fantastic stuff. And, we tried to have a conversation with her and more things went poo-poo on her technologically.
It just seems to be the way this is going. I don't understand either. This is really wild and so fascinating to hear about her experiences with technology either malfunctioning or the names of the alleged spirits that are coming up on her phone as she's there. I mean, it's really, really wild and interesting.
Yeah, like Harold. Like
Harold.
Like Harold. I'm expecting a phone call from Harold any moment here. I don't know what's gonna.
Well, yeah, and this was such a neat case because there's so many aspects to the phenomenon that was happening like that. We don't think about entities maybe using current technology. Many people are, when they think of spirit communication, they think of the old Victorian seances. They're not thinking about a cell phone.
Well, I mean, Cal Cooper, I just got the most recent Society for Psychical Research newsletter, and Cal Cooper is reviewing a book there called WhatsApps from the Dead. So,
neat.
As technology changes and advances, so does spirit communication, I guess. They're using WhatsApp now. Which
kind of makes sense. I mean, you just evolve with the technology like we've had to. It's so interesting. And I thought the bizarre phenomenon going on around the property was almost more interesting for me than what was going on in the property. This strange elemental type being that people are seeing so regularly, I find really fascinating.
I'm so interested. I actually want to go to the Mason House and do my own little investigation around there because that would be pretty cool.
Oh, that would be so much fun. I would be right there with you. I think these locations are so unique and special, and I wish Canada promoted more of them. I mean, I know we have them out there, but here it's such a different culture than in America, where here it's seen almost as a liability, where in America it's very much celebrated and promoted. It's a very different mentality and attitude there. This was such a cool case, and I'm so glad that Darcie was able to come on and talk about this. And what a great ghost story for Halloween, because here we are, it's coming up.
Spooky season.
Spooky season, guys.
So thank you for joining us on this eerie expedition, dear listeners, and it's been an eerie one for us too.
I'm surprised we're still recording. And remember, there is no line between the natural and the supernatural. All is consciousness. Until next time, stay curious, friends.
Yeah, curious, I guess. What's that sound? Supernatural Circumstances is a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can learn more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and learn more about me, Mike Browne, and listen to my show, Dark Poutine, at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com.
This fall, TV's most buzzworthy drama returns.
911, what's your emergency?
The crew from 911 is back on the scene, kicking off with an epic 3-part season premiere. The chaos begins when a truck spills its deadly cargo on the highway.
That truck was hauling 22 million killer bees.
Now, a catastrophe of biblical proportions swarms the city.
It's a bee NATO.
911, all new Thursdays on Global. Stream on Stack TV.